I need to start first to say in a way that thanks to, of course, Ida and Philip and the team, and it was a kind of circumstances and coincidences that this kind of plays out. And I also want to thank Ellen and Franziska because they were from beginning enthusiastic, because in the moment we talked about what this is about, I thought of you too, because in a way it represents two things that I think are very much a trend, and it will be a trend towards the future. I think what Ellen did, it's probably not anymore possible in Norway either. The strong planning chief that manages to kind of tie all the knots together and pull out that plan as Bjørvika and realize that plan, I don't think it's possible today either anymore. And then another tendency and trend that we all see for many reasons, for sustainability reasons, that I think architects, traditional architects, if we're going to have any role in society in the future in the way we had before, we need to start designing with kind of the surroundings or environment based, or starting point on outdoor spaces and biology and the landscape. So I would say I'm kind of almost tempted to take a master in landscape architecture, because it changes the way you enter the project, influences the project. And this also kind of Bjørvika that we saw, I think it's also the first really bigger plan, and maybe the last, that was really designed with outdoor spaces being focus, and then the buildings came. Because what we usually do as architects, we first think of objects and placing the square meters, the heights, and then landscape architect comes and kind of fix some greenery in between. I mean, I hope it's the future is more that we start with landscape, start with outdoor spaces, because that's also something that we all together can agree is for kind of better good, for common good, and at the same time has a positive consequence for economy. It creates value for whoever is investor, and it's easy to communicate whoever is investor. Everybody kind of wins with focusing on outdoor spaces. So I think that's a kind of, even with the choice of people colleagues I brought with me from Norway, that was already a kind of point I wanted to make, that there is a tendency that is important there. I need to say a bit about office. I'm between Oslo and Sarajevo, now a bit more in Oslo than in Sarajevo, but I lived there after the war for 3-4 years and started office also there. Why Sarajevo and Rijeka? For me, both of these cities are actually trying to figure out how to reinvent themselves. Both cities are very nostalgic about their past for a lot of good reasons, but also that kind of stops the processes that need to enable both cities to really reinvent themselves. So instead of looking back to past solutions as an answer for future problems, rather we need to kind of try to think how some other futures are possible. And I just like it happens somehow, of course I come originally from Bosnia, from Prijedor, so I'm not from kind of seaside, but my mother, when she retired in Norway, she moved to Rijeka, so she lives here, so I also know Rijeka, and I come back, and this is where I usually swim myself when I'm here, and I'm also often in Sarajevo, and for me these two cities are very kind of, have some similarities that are very interesting, both in how they approach the things and how they deal with this extreme version of capitalism that we are kind of dealing in these transition societies. Oslo, of course, we have heard a lot of things. I think the kind of major quality that I see as not somebody who is born there is the access to nature, both in a city but also in a very close vicinity, and also very different kind of nature from the urban nature that is these two images, and almost like forest-like. That is also, this place is just 10 minutes walk from Bjørvika, so it looks like it's kind of far away from that kind of urban situation. We are office in Oslo. We are small office. We're trying to approach our job without being dogmatic. We're trying to kind of place ourselves in the middle and negotiate things. We are trying to manage our role in an ethical way. We think that whatever value we create for clients should also have some value for society or neighborhood we work in, and we are very diverse. We are just 12 people, but out of 12 people we are from 7 different countries. Aside of Scandinavia, there is Singapore, there is Germany, there is Slovakia, and this also influences a bit the way we approach discussions. We are partly all have this kind of relation to another context, but also have a position of somebody who observes at the same time while we act. And that gives sometimes interesting perspectives. What we do and how we do it is that we try to always to cooperate. Even this thing here, it's cooperation. I kind of reached straight away to you too. And as a small office, if you want to be involved in a bigger project, that's kind of, for us, been interesting, because I earlier worked in a bigger office with many more employees. That's what we do. We also think, for us as an architect, we like shifting scales from small to big. So I'm, at this point, involved in several detailed zoning plans, but we also work on very small projects that are kind of an entirely different process and entirely different scale. Because I think this keeps us more agile, and it kind of brings different perspectives. This shift kind of brings interesting things from each of them to these contexts. And again, because we are small, we need to have a large network that we can always kind of include, and most of our projects are in one or another way collaboration. We do a lot of timber architecture in Norway, so some of the projects are built and some of them are underway. As a very few architects, we also involved in infrastructure, so we build at this stage quite big bridge in Drammen, the city that you were talking about. We are, of course, more and more tasks are about adapting existing buildings that are often involved with the heritage authorities and these kind of things. And our office is also in one of these buildings. This is all, how do you say, power, yeah, warehouse, and we sit in, yeah. So we sit here and overlook the river in the middle of the city. And then, of course, urbanism, that we will talk a bit more on. And then I have this kind of bastard brother or sister in Sarajevo, where I have another partner, where we do a lot of different projects. And I'll just briefly also show you some of them. This is a housing in the middle of Sarajevo, hotel just outside of Sarajevo. These are realized projects. I just focus on realized projects. This is also a housing, basically quite kind of normal price housing, but because the things are as they are in our environments, I always say to my colleagues in Sarajevo, you can do things here that I cannot do in Norway, and of course opposite. So this kind of architecture for a regular housing project, for different reasons, are almost impossible to realize in Norway. And this is a next phase where we then work with the same team. Every flat has a balconies, but we do another kind of detailing and another kind of adding to a variation on the same theme. We do also this kind of very small projects that are somehow important for me, because I don't know if you probably all know, in the society after the last wars, there is this kind of foreign way of thinking about belief or religion. And in Bosnia, we always had this neighborhood, small mosques that were just for like a neighborhood. And one of the projects that we are now doing in 10 years is this, because it's built by people who live there, and this is all casted in concrete. And for you that maybe don't know so much about it, but of course in Islam it's not allowed with any kind of elaborate pictures and stuff like that. So we managed to persuade relatively conservative people to open all the first floor towards the real gardens outside. So instead of painting them on the walls, we tried to kind of establish gardens on 3 sides of the prayer room. And this kind of projects, of course, do kind of make, are one of the reasons why we want to shift between the scales. And we do also a project for actually the Croatian company Infobip. We won a competition against 3LDH and Amir Vuk Zec that was competing, where we try to argue that in Sarajevo, whoever works in Infobip, they should know that they are in Sarajevo campus and not in Zagreb campus or in Vodnjan. And this idea of all the Bosnian canyons, river canyons, that kind of results in this space that connects park behind the building and the entrance, car entrance in the front, was a theme that we worked there. And we also introduced timber as something that's kind of that's something that we in Bosnia have a lot of, but use too seldom. And we, the office in this kind of structure exists for 10 years, and we've managed to have some success, even with being a quite small practice, and to be nominated for some prizes, and that's always, of course, nice to get that kind of recognition. So, the importance of compromise. We've already talked a lot about this, the fact that we need to find a way for everybody to feel that they kind of win something in these kind of processes. So I will, in a way, touch upon more in detail how a regular zoning plan is done and exemplify it through a project that we just delivered to a second. We had just second delivery of a zoning plan. That means that it goes to the town hall to be politically approved, and it's kind of cleared of all issues that needs to be cleared off. So if I place this slide to you and you read it, what's your first association? What does it make you think? Lack of trust between the involved parties. Politicians don't trust their own experts, the planning office and the other specialists. Investors and politicians, depending on which side in politics do they belong, either are too distrustful or very naive when it comes to private investors' intention and ambitions, and general public doesn't trust any of the sides. I know that you all think this is Croatia, but if I kind of exaggerate, this is also Oslo. And it's just to make point that, of course, when we saw the lectures from Ellen and from Franziska, it all looks like, you know, perfect wall, harmony, everybody's like doing the things, everything goes smooth, my eye, and all these things, but it's not like that. And I also, the reason why I think the plan of Björvika is probably not any more realistic is because something happened in these 10 years. That plan was approved just kind of in the last moment. And the way, maybe there is also all the global issues and kind of, I feel there is a certain balkanization going on several levels in global context of how people kind of deal with each other. This has become reality, also in Oslo. This would be the situation when Ellen was planning chief. You will have in a bigger project, you will have a planning chief here with all the experts that she has or he has on site, and the politicians were somewhere in the background waiting for these guys to give them a message. Okay, this is okay, you can approve it. And then, of course, architect or planning consultant on this side would be kind of communicating investors' wishes and trying to figure out here in this kind of dialogue between these two, both professionals, what's the best thing to do. I would say that this is more close to the reality today. So what's happening is now that, of course, there was always some informal dialogue between politicians and investors also before. But now it's more direct and it's more open. They don't pretend of not having dialogue. They basically go straight to each other and try to agree on something, and then they try to instruct planning office what to do. And so I just want to kind of exaggerate a bit of this point because, of course, again, when we come from these areas, we all think things are rosy and nice, but this is a kind of interesting thing that also kind of contextualize where we work and what we, as architects, as planners, also need to somehow deal. We need to figure out how to kind of navigate in this landscape in a good way. And then what also happens that is maybe actually for Luca even more interesting and for you, it's that there is a public movement against modern architecture. That is New Urbanism kind of time 10. This is a project of student architect from Technical University in Trondheim last year. There is a department at School of Architecture in Trondheim now that does only this kind of projects. You can guess that the professor is from this region. I will not say from where, but the one that runs it, it's from Balkans. But it is interesting because it kind of reduces, oversimplifies the architecture and development of urban development, reducing it to kind of aesthetics and to facades. And this is also something that has been a quite public debate. I think actually what we can thank them for is that they really brought public interest back to the architecture, because it was not so much focused on that, because everybody was used to that kind of architecture. Scandinavian architecture is respected abroad, but in a way this also varies very much from the between the Scandinavian countries. So I think also, Ellen, maybe this wouldn't be possible today, the barcode, because it was also in a specific time after the financial crisis, Bjørvika plan approved. So I think with all these kind of different things, the way things are done, maybe it would have looked differently today. And then just to kind of explain, go a bit more kind of, it's maybe not so different from Croatia, but this is a typical kind of line of a zoning plan, where it starts with the initiative from investor, whoever it is, with a consulting meeting, and then you need to kind of develop some kind of planning initiative, explain what you want to do. Some of these deadlines are law binding, and theoretically you should be able to get a plan approved in 2.5, even faster basically, but it really rarely never happens before 2.5, 3 years. And you see a bit of responsibilities, how they are done between the... So if we talk about trust, and I tell you that is also kind of, the trust is also becoming an issue in Oslo. How do we approach this? How do we approach it as professionals? How do we approach it as architects? And how do we kind of deal with it in a right way? And how do we kind of manage to lift discussion from purely about density and how much square meters somebody gets to build to something that has to do with the greater good, like the both presentation try to kind of represent. We need to focus on, we need to add another phase before we enter the formal phase of the planning process. And that phase, it's the only possibility where you can lift discussion up to the greater good before you enter kind of a formal grind of a process where everybody kind of more protects their own interests and is afraid of making a mistake, you know, that somebody can accuse them of doing and stuff like that. And this is also the way we approached the issues with the project I'm using as an example in Bergen. The reason why this phase kind of appeared is because Bergen, for a short time, was the first city that reintroduced the role of city architect. This function exists in Denmark and in Sweden to a bigger extent. It was maybe present in some places 100 years back in Norway also, but it was gone. And the city architect had the role of lifting, in the beginning of projects, some discussions on an overall level before it kind of enters the formal phase of the, and they asked client to do something they called, to develop something they called concept plan. And we did this in a time of 6 months. In this period of time, we both developed a concept, and we had a dialogue and feedback from the most important departments in the city. That means informal meetings, not one that are binding, but somehow kind of you can lift up discussions on a higher level and try to reach common understanding where the project should go. And then we used 4 years for the formal process. This is kind of interesting to show you, just to see how much of what we decided here was left, and what did we really use 4 years on. In the beginning, when we got the job, because we got the job commissioned through an interview where we presented how we think the project should be approached, we argued for our client that was Profier, that's a very commercial developer, that, okay, we know that this is important for you, but we should also think of these too. We should think of general public, we should think of departments, you meet public authorities straight away, so that they are part of the process from beginning. And this is also something that I think, at least in my experience in everyday dealing with these kind of things, that it is really important to, and I think we also discussed it yesterday, before we start drawing and designing, we should really design process first. And we did this really thorough plan for these 6 months. What do we want to discuss, with who, at which phase, and even kind of very early on, I don't think it was, we did change some dates, but it was a kind of 2 points to make. It's one that we wanted to client to be aware of all of the subjects that teams we should be running by city architects and heritage authorities, but also again always keep them aware that there are 3 different processes that should somehow relate to each other. And they should relate to what is already of existing strategies and plans of the city. And one of the important strategic documents in Bergen City, it's a document that's called Architecture Plus, that was developed by a city architect. And it is important because it is something that I don't know, with the way our profession developed, we somehow developed our own language that nobody else understood than us. And in a way, this was also causing an issues in this kind of zoning plan processes, because I think people use the same terms, but really talked about apples and bananas. They were not talking about, they were not having the same associations when they used the terms. So what the city architect did, they made this popular version of what they think quality in architecture and quality in a city development means, and what they want us to discuss when we come to talk with them. And then they would even, they were this kind of, I used just Google Translate to translate this. This document is just in Norwegian, unfortunately. But there were really kind of simple points, and they also, for each point, did some extra tests to explain what they mean by it and what they mean by it in a local context, and they exemplify it with some projects. I think this, in the context of this popular revolt against architects and stuff like that, this is very useful tool, because it kind of helps us all kind of have an itinerary how to approach dialogue, so that we can kind of try to end up talking about same issues and same things. Another of these points, how they explain it. I will, of course, deliver you can kind of share the lecture so you can see more of the details. So when we come back to this concept plan Hegreneset, this is a site. It's a kind of a peninsula, almost like appendix. City of Bergen is here. Architectural school in Bergen is here. So it is a very kind of part of towards the fjord. So when you enter with the boat, you enter like this, and you see it, and then you go back to the sea. And it was obviously industrial zone from before. There are some buildings that have a heritage value and that are protected, and some of them that are not really protected. They're not listed. They're listed, but they're not. They don't need. There is a kind of discussion possibility to discuss them. So it's very diverse and also quite resourceful neighborhood in a vicinity that already exists. Our brief was summed up like this, and both city and the client, and this is also a bit of the kind of old way of, they talked about how do we make this area a destination. So in the context of Oslo and in Norway also in general, when you say destination, very often architects think of objects or a building that are kind of goal to get to, or something that's kind of very expressive or something. What we kind of did here, that we collaborate with a landscape architect that's called Smedsvik, and we have also a local kind of zoning specialist that is good in writing the zoning rules. We are only an architects that push forward the process and runs the process, but while they do a lot of handcraft themselves. And this is also something we always do. We always work with local offices, because you lose. I mean, you can of course travel there and you can do a lot of registration job yourself, but there is something also on having an ear to what's happening locally that it's hard to pick on if you don't have a pair of ears in the city. And after this initial phase of planning design, we approached the project. We studied, of course, history. We studied the landscape. We studied the social infrastructure that's there. What do we need to kind of answer? Is there a need for school, for kindergarten, for these kind of things? We also started topographically to cut the land to see what are the kind of pieces this consists of. And also kind of we understood very fast that this area here that are villas, it's a kind of resourceful neighbors that we knew will have opinions about the development, because these villas are protected, some of them, because they were built by a famous Norwegian architect, and it's also built in relation to the industry activity there. So there was a kind of, how do they call it, not necessarily individual value, but as a kind of neighborhood, as a representation of a certain time. And we started also straight away discussing edge towards the sea. Some places are deep water, some places are a bit more shallow, and started to discuss. And this combined with more really concrete provocations on what could kind of development look like in the future, with some concepts trying to take some inspiration from historical images and maps that we found there. And just a lot of iterations of different things just to provoke. And this is used, the same material is used towards the client and towards the municipality. That's also something that we kind of also always try to be conscious about. We don't make different presentations for a client and for a public, and we try to kind of agree with the clients on this issue. Maybe I think what we kind of take away, it's the numbers, because that's not something we should discuss about. It's not about numbers in a way. And we, in this initial phases, rather than designing too far, we use a lot of references to what kind of architecture, to what kind of public spaces, all sort of things. And we try also, the landscape architects start already kind of designing some meeting points with the sea and what that could be. And we looked into the buildings that were listed, what could they contribute, and this is almost our own project. We had a group that was working parallelly with the kind of analyzing what the heritage, what of the listed buildings could be in the future and how they could be used. And the issue with the listed buildings and the investors is that they see it only as a cost, because of course they are very expensive to adopt, and they are rarely a type that can be used for housing. So in our case, we ended up using proposing a silo as a housing, and a little piece of this old kind of storage building, but the rest was proposed from our side to be a kind of place where you can, communal house that you can kind of rent for, to have a birthday or a wedding or something like this. And this was developed in more concrete sketches that, again, this is just a concept plan, and I show it because it, of course, changes through the process. And what we did agree is, of course, because these neighborhoods, they want to keep the view to the sea, we need some kind of communication lines going through the different places. And what also really appeared as a kind of discussion very early on is that we propose that each of these areas should be car-free, because it's almost like no place for anything else there. And this ended up with a solution that our client gladly accepted, and that's not always the case, that they need to build a tunnel that goes from here, that kind of leads to a parking lot that's under here that serves the whole area. And the rest is car-free. So the distances and how do we kind of, what is this destination in the project ended up being two public spaces, two kind of squares that are in beginning, one it's very oriented to the sea and one it's more enclosed. This also changes a bit. Of course, again, the line of connecting the shore and possibility to continue northward. It is approximately 900 meters of shoreline that will be made accessible to all neighbors, also the neighbors that, of course, are there from before. And there you start developing also identities, so you start developing names for each part, because here it was a place where at some point there was a coal storage, so that kind of takes certain identity, tries to build on that. And there were, originally this was used as a battery place for, how do you say, like guns, because it was a kind of fortress very far back. And then, of course, the column means just the top, and so on and so on. And this was a kind of what the physical appearance of a concept plan was, and what we then discussed with the municipality, and we also developed a lot of sketches that were trying to envision what kind of spaces this could be, and we consciously kept them on really sketch level, because one of the things that also appeared as a kind of recent debate in Norway is that architects are very good in making really realistic renders that then really don't happen in reality. So in kind of making kind of clear that this is not this is not necessarily how it will look like, but we try to show what intention and what the ambition with the project is and what kind of connection we want to create. So it was a separate document that was a kind of basis for planning initiative, and then development start, new iterations, then with the municipality, and you will see at the end, I just tried to go because it shows a bit, I'm not sure if all this time spent in this phase is so valuable, because you will see what we kind of end up in a plan at the end. There are changes, but in a planning map, I think a lot of things that we already decided from before, it's still intact. This is after one round of iterations with the municipality, and this kind of was a basis for first sending in of a plan. Okay, what we managed to persuade and find kind of win-win for everybody is that we managed to managed to get municipality, but never also our client, that this place here today has only 2 detached houses to stay unbuilt, and it becomes a kind of park, central park between the northern and southern neighborhood, because we also argue that it's more cheap, because that's the kind of arguments they adhere to, that it's more cheap to build these buildings if we push them north, because it's already flat, and you can kind of devise tunnel that's cheaper to build. So there are all these pragmatic reasons why it does end up like this, but it kind of wins us back a big kind of value for neighborhood as a whole. And this park also adds to kind of destinations that are still there in the north and south. You all know this kind of things. It's after a while you start doing these kind of divisions. How does this happen in reality in phases and stuff like that? And this is a basis for a planning map. Landscape architect develop illustration plan that kind of shows what this could be, and that all the outdoor spaces need to be accounted for, that you need to be able to build a housing, and the more of this kind of sketches that show what this kind of public spaces could be. How do you kind of approach area? You saw the image, I think, initially. How does this affect? But also, how do these owners of the villas still keep their view? This is important illustration for to make plan go through in a way. But then, you know, this is a thing. After you deliver in a first phase, we are now in the municipalities here. You had a hearing first, so everybody can respond to a plan and get feedback, and you get a kind of tabel with 150 comments to your plan, where maybe 35 are private owners of the villas, and then the rest is all the departments, where you know that heritage and water and sewage department, how does it call? Yeah, they are very important, because you need to kind of infrastructure, you need to agree, and also, of course, mobility in a way that they accept that, because it was discussion, how do you clean the snow from the public spaces and all this stuff, so they need to accept that you have a reduced access for cars for the sake of housing quality, and this needs to be kind of sorted out. And then this ends up being a kind of maps and a kind of formal documents that are developed as a result of that. And what is also interesting, that the tunnel suddenly becomes, have two arms, one that goes straight in a parking lot that kind of uses the height difference between these two levels to be, kind of disappears under the buildings, and one arm that goes over here that is for bikers and pedestrians, so that kind of cars and bikers kind of split under the ground of and you have, of course, enormous amount of attachments that follow these kind of plans, but these two documents were, in a way, from a strategic point of view, those who were really kind of defining what needs to be seen as something that is a quality that shouldn't be discussed later on, and then we kind of also, I wanted just to show a few pieces here, is that we discussed historical buildings, and also we found this little bay that was there before that we reopen in our plan as a part of a project. But also there is something interesting with this place that was always used to really large scale differences because of silo and because of individuals housing and then the boats that are big. So we also kind of wanted to have that while we were working. And then there is this really, really great wooden building that was, of course, storage at some point. That is, both these two buildings are listed. And this is because it was decaying, some floor are disappearing, but the structure is intact. And we kind of proposed to remove some things and to open a passage through and make this part be a kind of communal kulturni dom, something that you can use as a neighborhood, but not cultural center in organization type, but yeah. So that, and these parts here, we suggested that there should be, because in Norway there is a bigger and bigger population, elderly population, and the projects where there is, that kind of are always difficult to get and find place for, is the projects where you develop kind of housing that is slightly different than the standard housing you sell on the market. So we suggested that these buildings that are somehow difficult to develop as the two buildings here, as a kind of a regular housing you put on the market, that maybe the municipality and a private investor should talk about if all this could be both housing for elderly students and then combined with this kind of element of communal function. And we saw this as a kind of a cathedral that can be kept as a kind of raw building inside, and that you could kind of rent it in, and either it's a birthday or a wedding or some kind of school celebration from the neighborhood. And we studied the structure quite thoroughly to try to figure out, can we add some floors and how do we do it? And we discussed also, because we had this was not done just by us, it's done by people that are kind of representatives of a commercial guild of a city. So the people that run different kind of cultural institutions to try to discuss what could this be, what could it be programmed with, but without deciding this. So after this, it takes time. So it's another round of iterations and nudging to kind of get all things cleared up. And I'm not sure if this really, if we even looked on a totally different typologies on this place to see what kind of area that is. And of course, including both wind and sun and these different things, because there are quite high tides and also waves in these areas. Just to kind of make it comparable, equally long list of attachments. 1 year spent, and there is not so much difference here. And it's a lot of resources used, both from a public side and from investor side. So in a way, what I think somehow it is become a kind of issue, because the society is really, well, it's over bureaucratized, is that you get this kind of process of iterations that not necessarily lead to better projects, or maybe we try to agree on things that we could agree later on in the building phase, where you have projects. So I think it's an interesting time to evaluate this at the end. So you see we have exactly the same thing we had in the beginning. So it's a one destination public space here, another one here. We have a park in the middle. The whole coastline is free and accessible for public. So all the kind of qualities we had from the concept plan that was used half year on, it's still intact, but we then used 4 years on kind of developing things into a formal solution. I think what was the benefit I mean, it sounds weird, but I think our client expected this to take much longer time it took. So it took 4 years, and we are now waiting for it to be politically approved, and it will be approved because everything is cleared up. But I think it made process smoother. I forgot to say, but in this pre-formal phase, because in formal phase, also like here, you're obliged to do participation, but it's very often just to tick a box rather than really influencing something, because plan is developed so far that you cannot do so big changes. So we did have a workshop with the school. There is a school over here, and we did with the neighbors about what kind of functions, public functions or services would they like to be present when the shoreline is open. So there's like public toilets, place to store canoes. I mean, it becomes very concrete. And also it was very easy, it gave us argument towards the client and towards the municipality to use first floor of the silo, and to kind of also keep this part less commercial of the old buildings, because we could kind of say that we can care for that kind of functions. But we wanted just to have, because of course these courtyards, they are very much kind of micro spaces for those who live here. But we wanted to have this hierarchy in a type of spaces that is kind of makes this a bit more accessible, and that all people who live here can feel that they can get there without really intruding in somebody's kind of private area, while the private areas are more kept towards the courtyard. And then the park, and the same here, the value, I think, the biggest value of dialogue with municipality that this did open towards the sea also. And because there was a building here before, but this building did become larger than I think it's good for the area. We tried to keep it separate before, but then it became one. Because the heritage authorities wanted this listed building to be visible earlier. So it's this kind of a pragmatics of a thing, and then back to the, and this is a only kind of connection that was a result of a new plan for this area that kind of reappeared, that I think it's a good idea because it's a quite windy place in the winter, so to have it connection longitudinal from north to south that is a bit further away from the sea, it helps things going on. And then what kind of becomes a very big discussion close to the end is how do you do it in phasing, and what kind of public spaces should be developed parallelly with housing. So the client or investor has a responsibility to develop all outdoor spaces and then deliver it to the municipality. And since they both need to build a tunnel and the spaces around, there was discussion because there are big costs. Of course, even when they build this, the cost of this tunnel and this parking lot and this outdoor spaces here, it's so big that they are basically still not making money. So it was discussion how this should be made. And I forgot to, I mean, of course we discussed a lot of issues about services here. So the whole trash system is that you have a vacuum kind of system that collects private rubbish, and it's picked up here, so it ends up in the kind of central facility, and it's picked there. So there are no containers, everything is just in kind of bins that you kind of are in the ground. But also this kind of phasing and this kind of, when this is done, it becomes an issue that is discussed thoroughly because it's juridically binding. So they cannot get permission to use flats before they build. That's what follows. It's the same probably in Croatia also, but it's kind of negotiations that. So it's back to this process. We can kind of, it is interesting to look back. It's for me interesting to look back what kind of was decided here and how much time did we use on other things and what's the value of it. The one document that is now more and more in use that I just will briefly go through is that because the detailed plans are not anymore used on projects that actually will be built, we have a design manual that follows the zoning plan. So with the inside of the yellow patches that we saw on the zoning plan, the architecture can look entirely different than what we proposed. But then there is a design manual that follows that kind of is used by a municipality when they then approve actual projects. And there, the focus was clearly on the outdoor spaces and qualities that should be kind of kept there as a guiding lines. The edges between the private and the public, protection from the kind of waves and the sea. How do you use landscaping and small level differences to deal with that? And each kind of important space has been illustrated and kind of some principles for design defined. And this is also legally binding document. So it's not only zoning rules and the zoning map, but also this document is binding for further development of a project. Yeah, just kind of, and then you saw how much it was about outdoor spaces. For the buildings, it was mainly kind of character. Maybe how do you kind of treat northern part that should have a different identity than the southern? What kind of entrances? How do you deal with terraces and roof terraces? Where do you have where do I allow with what kind of balconies and stuff like that? It's kind of also very often important. It has to do, of course, also with climate and wind and where they're exposed, but also when is it above the public or private? And then also how do we treat the first floors? In Norway, in this kind of neighborhood, it's 95% housing. So it's only the old buildings that we kind of propose to be used for another kind of things. But then it becomes important that first floors of housing can also give something back to city life. So we also propose that they can have entrances from outside as more like a townhouse kind of situations, and that where there is a private outdoor space, there should be an edge between the public and private, with greenery and the height difference appearing there. And of course, when there is a commercial, it should be without height difference. We also discuss materiality more on a kind of general level, and they're not entirely decide, but to kind of give some kind of direction for the north, some direction for the south. And some comments on again on how this, the few principles that were decided on a zoning plan level for the existing buildings. So I think what we managed to do here is to somehow get client to think like this, and not like, actually the image here I showed on the interview to get the job. I told them we need to somehow figure out to work together. We cannot kind of first sell something to you and then go and sell to a municipality. We need to find a way to work together, and also this fact that we are not alone on this job, that we use local experts also with us, kind of help them accept that. And I think what we've learned is that kind of focusing, as I tell you in the start, and Francisco also done, I think more and more focusing on this kind of network of publicly accessible green spaces becomes a way to agree about important things, and then that also softens dialogue about heights and density and all this kind of thing, because municipality then also sees that kind of public interest is taken care of, and that the certain qualities will kind of be there regardless what architecture becomes to be. And in a way, our goal is always that we keep in mind that we are kind of working for all kind of ages and type of people, and try to reflect that in our project, and also being realistic about how the economy works, because we know that our client needs to pay for all outdoor spaces, and so then we need to have that dimension with us, because otherwise we will not be able to persuade them to do all the other stuff. And if you are not credible on that, it's very hard to build the trust that I started with, that is kind of becoming an issue. And I think in that sense, to just kind of round up, is that I think our role in this, both architects and planners, it's more and more to try to take a role of this kind of diplomat between, or a kind of negotiator in between, but maybe actually accept and allow that also other people hold the pen in the process, and also think more of a nudging rather than selling, as a way of kind of communicating our intentions in a project. It helps build the trust and kind of hopefully results in better projects.